He was a man who survived fire, but never escaped the guilt of living. On the edge of a frozen town, he heard shouting, not bargaining, not laughter, but cruelty. A German shepherd, pregnant, tied to a rusted fence, bruised, silent, protecting the unborn lives inside her body while being sold for $10. He didn't plan to save anyone that day. He was barely saving himself. But in her eyes, he saw something he thought was gone forever. Strength that refuses to die, and a reason to stay. What happens next will make you believe in quiet miracles and second chances for the forgotten. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. If you believe no child or animal should ever face fear alone, hit subscribe now and share this story with someone who needs hope. Hollow Creek, Colorado, was the kind of town winter never seemed to leave. Even in late November, frost clung stubbornly to rooftops, and the wind moved through the narrow streets with a dry, cutting patience, as if it had all the time in the world. The mountains that ringed the town stood like old sentinels, their peaks dusted white, watching quietly as the people below went about lives shaped by cold, distance, and memory. Snow hadn't fallen that morning, but the air carried its promise. The sky hung low and colorless, a dull sheet of steel pressing down on the town. Breath turned visible the moment it left the lungs, and every sound, boots on pavement, a truck engine coughing awake, a door slamming, seemed sharper in the thin air. Ethan Calloway stood on the narrow porch of his cabin at the edge of town, staring into that sky as if it might explain something he had never been able to put into words. He was 41 years old, though the lines carved into his face made him look older when the light hit him wrong. He was tall, built solidly through the shoulders and chest, the kind of frame that once carried heavy gear without complaint. Years ago, people used to describe him as reassuring, someone who filled space in a calm, dependable way. Now, there was a tightness to how he held himself, as though his body expected danger even in stillness. His hair, once a dark, uncomplicated brown, had begun to gray at the temples. He kept it short, not out of style, but out of habit. His beard was uneven, trimmed only when it became inconvenient, peppered with ash-colored strands that hadn't been there before the fire. His eyes were a pale, tired blue, the kind that reflected light rather than holding it, and when he blinked, it was slow, deliberate, as if he needed to make sure the world was still where he left it. Ethan pulled his jacket tighter around himself, though the cold wasn't what made his shoulders tense. It was the smell. Someone, somewhere down the road, had started a wood stove too early in the day. The faint scent of smoke rode the wind, thin but unmistakable. It slid into Ethan's lungs before he could stop it. His jaw locked. For a brief, violent second, the porch vanished. Heat replaced cold. The sky darkened, thick with ash. The sound came first, wood snapping, collapsing inward, a deep, hollow roar that swallowed everything else. His chest tightened, breath catching halfway in, muscles primed to move even as his feet stayed planted. Ethan closed his eyes. Not running, he reminded himself, just standing. He counted under his breath, a habit drilled into him during therapy sessions he no longer attended. 1, 2, 3. By the time he reached 5, the porch returned. The sky was gray again. The mountains were still there. His hands were shaking, but they were empty. The smell faded as the wind shifted. Ethan exhaled slowly and stepped back inside. The cabin was small, built decades ago when Hollow Creek had still been growing instead of shrinking. The interior was clean but sparse, furnished with things chosen for function rather than comfort. A wooden table scarred with old burns sat near the window. A pair of heavy boots rested by the door, soles worn thin in places. On one wall hung a framed photograph Ethan never looked at for long. A fire crew, helmets on, faces smudged with soot, smiling at the camera as if none of them had any reason to fear the future. Ethan moved through the kitchen on autopilot, filling the kettle, setting it on the stove. He didn't turn the flame too high. Sudden ignition still unsettled him. The click of the lighter was controlled, precise. While the water heated, he leaned against the counter and let his gaze drift to the small window above the sink. From there, he could see the edge of town, the feed store that had closed last year, the row of modest houses beyond it, smoke rising in thin lines from chimneys like signals sent into the cold. Hollow Creek hadn't always felt this empty. Ethan had come here 12 years earlier as part of a wildfire response team deployed from out of state. Back then, the town had been loud with gratitude. Kids waved handmade signs. Shop owners left coffee out for crews who worked through the night. People had looked at Ethan like he was something solid in a world that burned too easily. That was before the Ashfall Ridge fire. No one in Hollow Creek said its name anymore, not out loud. They referred to it indirectly, as if the thing itself might hear. The fire had come fast, driven by wind that shifted without warning, swallowing terrain maps and safety margins alike. Ethan had been the last one out, the only one out. Survival had changed him in ways he hadn't known how to explain. The town had offered support at first, meals dropped off, hands on shoulders, words like hero spoken softly and often. But time wore those gestures thin. People moved on. Fires elsewhere demanded attention. Ethan stayed. He always stayed. The kettle began to whistle, sharp and insistent. Ethan flinched before he could stop himself, the sound slicing through his thoughts like a blade. He reached out and turned off the stove, breathing hard, palms flat against the counter until the echo in his chest settled. Coffee tasted like nothing that morning. He drank it anyway, standing by the window, eyes unfocused. At some point, a truck passed on the road outside, tires crunching over gravel. Ethan watched it disappear toward the center of town and felt the familiar pull of avoidance tug at him. He hadn't planned to go out. But staying inside all day had its own dangers. Silence could turn on him just as quickly as noise. Ethan set the mug down and grabbed his keys. The drive into town took less than 10 minutes. Hollow Creek was small enough that most destinations blurred together. Post office, diner, hardware store, and the vacant lot behind the old agricultural warehouse where, on certain days, vendors set up a temporary flea market. Ethan usually avoided that area. Too many voices, too many sudden sounds. Today, he told himself, he just needed a few supplies. The truck rumbled beneath him, familiar and grounding. Ethan kept his grip on the steering wheel firm but relaxed, eyes scanning the road ahead with the reflexes of someone trained to notice changes in terrain. The mountains loomed closer as he descended into town, their shadows stretching long across the streets. He parked near the warehouse and sat there longer than necessary, engine idling, breath fogging the windshield. From where he sat, he could already hear the low hum of activity, radios playing somewhere, metal clinking, voices rising and falling in uneven rhythms. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. "You can leave," a voice in his head whispered. No one would notice. Instead, he opened the door and stepped out into the cold. The air bit at his face immediately, sharp enough to keep him present. He pulled his jacket tighter and started toward the market, keeping to the edges where foot traffic thinned. People glanced at him as he passed, nothing more than brief acknowledgments, the kind reserved for familiar strangers. A woman selling secondhand clothes nodded in his direction. She was middle-aged, bundled in layers, her face red from the cold. Ethan nodded back but didn't stop. He wasn't here to talk. He told himself that as he moved deeper into the market. Somewhere nearby, metal scraped loudly against concrete. The sound rang out sudden and sharp, reverberating off the warehouse walls. Ethan froze, his chest constricted, breath stalling as his body reacted faster than thought. The noise echoed again, louder this time, followed by a burst of angry shouting. Not laughter, not bargaining. Anger. Ethan swallowed and forced his feet to move. Whatever it was, he told himself, he could walk away. He always could. But something about the tone, the rawness in it, pulled at him, tight and insistent. He followed the sound toward the far edge of the lot, where weeds broke through cracked asphalt and the wind cut colder. That was when he heard the word. Useless. Spoken with enough venom to make it land like a blow. Ethan stopped walking. The wind carried another shout, harsher this time, followed by a sound that made his stomach drop. A dull, sickening impact that did not belong to any object being sold. His hands curled into fists at his sides. He hadn't seen anything yet. But something inside him, long, quiet, and half-buried, shifted. And without fully understanding why, Ethan Calloway took another step forward. Ethan stood at the edge of the flea market where the cracked asphalt gave way to mud and weeds, the wind cutting harder there, as if the town itself wanted nothing to do with what happened in that corner. The shouting grew clearer now, stripped of distance and distortion. It was the voice of a man used to being obeyed, rough with impatience, edged with something meaner than anger. A sound followed, leather or fabric striking flesh, and then a low, restrained whine that was cut off almost as soon as it began. Ethan's boots felt suddenly heavy. Not fear heavy, not yet, more like the wait that came before action, the pause where instinct and memory argued over who got to decide next. He took another step forward, then another, rounding a stack of rusted farm equipment that blocked the view. That was when he saw her. The German Shepherd was tied to a bent metal fence post with a length of frayed rope. She was large, even by the breed standards, but gaunt in a way that spoke of long-term neglect rather than illness. Her coat, once black and tan, had dulled to the color of wet ash, clotted in places with old dirt. One ear stood half upright, the other bent slightly at the tip, as if it had healed wrong after an injury. Her age was hard to judge, perhaps 5 or 6, but exhaustion had added years to her posture. Her belly was unmistakably swollen. She was pregnant, far enough along that there was no hiding it. The curve of her abdomen pulled at her stance, shifting her weight awkwardly to compensate. One hind leg trembled when she tried to adjust. The muscles overworked and underfed. Despite that, she stood between the fence and the man looming over her, her body angled protectively, shoulders squared in a way that was deliberate, not accidental. The man was thick through the neck and shoulders, built like someone who had once been strong, and now used that memory as a weapon. He wore a faded flannel jacket stretched tight across his gut, jeans stiff with old, grime, boots scarred at the toes. His beard was patchy and unkempt, the kind that suggested neglect rather than style, and his face was permanently flushed, as if irritation lived just beneath the skin. His hands were large, calloused, the knuckles swollen, hands that had done physical work and learned, over time, how much force they could apply without consequence. He yanked the rope once, sharp and sudden. The dog staggered, but didn't fall. "Get up," he snapped, though she was already standing. "You hear me? Get up." She didn't growl. She didn't bare her teeth. She shifted instead, turning her body so her side and her belly were angled away from his boots. Her head lifted, slow and steady, eyes dark and clear despite everything else. There was no panic in them, no submission either. What Ethan saw there stopped him cold. Awareness, the kind of awareness he had seen in people bracing themselves for pain they couldn't avoid. The man noticed Ethan then, scowling as if irritated by the interruption. "You buying or just staring?" he demanded. His voice carried easily, drawing a few glances from vendors farther back, though no one moved closer. Ethan didn't answer right away. He was watching the dog. Up close, he could see the scars beneath her coat, faint lines crossing her shoulders, one along the rib cage, pale against darker fur. Old injuries. He recognized the signs the way he recognized burn patterns on timber. History written into flesh. "What's wrong with her?" Ethan asked finally. His voice came out flat, controlled, the way it did when he didn't trust himself to feel too much at once. The man snorted. "What ain't?" He gave the rope another short jerk, more for emphasis than effect. "Eats too much, can't work, got herself knocked up. Useless now." The word hit Ethan harder than the earlier shout. "She's pregnant," Ethan said. "No kidding," the man replied, rolling his eyes. "That's the problem." The dog's ears flicked at the sound of Ethan's voice. She turned her head slightly, just enough to look at him directly. Her gaze held, steady and unblinking. Ethan felt something in his chest shift, subtle but unmistakable, like a door cracking open that had been sealed too long. "How much?" Ethan asked. The man's eyebrows lifted, surprised. He looked Ethan over properly then, taking in the worn jacket, the careful distance in his stance, the way his hands hung loose but ready. $10, he said. "That's it. You don't want her, she's going to the shelter Monday." They both knew what that meant. Ethan reached into his pocket without thinking. The $10 bill he pulled out was creased and soft from use, the edges frayed. It felt too light for what it was buying, or maybe it felt heavy for a reason he didn't want to name yet. "I'll take her," he said. The man blinked, then shrugged. "Your problem." He snatched the bill, already turning away, muttering something under his breath about idiots and bleeding hearts. Ethan stepped closer to the fence. The dog didn't flinch. She watched him carefully, her breathing measured, sides rising and falling in a controlled rhythm. He moved slowly, deliberately, crouching to bring himself closer to her eye level without crowding her space. He could see now that one of her front paws bore a faint limp when she shifted, another detail filed away without comment. "It's all right," he said, though he wasn't sure who he was saying it to. He untied the rope with hands that shook just slightly. The moment the tension released, the dog hesitated, then stepped back half a pace, testing the absence of restraint. She didn't bolt. She didn't retreat. She simply stood there, free, her body still angled protectively. Ethan straightened and took a step away, giving her room. After a moment, she followed, slow but determined, matching his pace with surprising precision, given her condition. People watched as they passed, some curious, some uncomfortable, most indifferent. No one said anything. The walk to Ethan's truck felt longer than it was. The wind picked up, tugging at his jacket, carrying the smell of oil and cold metal. When he opened the passenger door, he paused, unsure how to proceed. He had moved injured people, panicked animals, unconscious bodies. This felt different. The dog solved the problem for him. She gathered herself carefully, then climbed in, movements cautious but practiced. She circled once, as if checking the space, then settled onto the seat with a controlled exhale, belly heavy, back straight. Ethan closed the door gently. For a moment, he rested his forehead against the cold metal frame, eyes closed. The world felt very still, as if waiting to see what he would do next. "I don't know what they did to you," he said quietly, "but you're not going back there." Through the window, the dog watched him. Her eyes never left his face. When Ethan started the engine, she didn't startle. As the truck pulled away from the market, the sound of voices faded, replaced by the steady hum of the road. Snow began to fall then, light at first, almost tentative. Ethan didn't look back. The truck climbed the narrow road back toward Ethan's cabin, tires crunching softly over gravel, dusted with the season's first real snow. The German Shepherd lay rigidly on the passenger seat, posture upright despite the curve of her heavy belly, eyes fixed forward as if memorizing every turn. She did not pace or whine. She did not test the space. She behaved like someone who understood transport, who had learned long ago that movement meant uncertainty, and that stillness was safer. Ethan noticed all of it without commenting. Observation came easily to him. Reaction took longer. The cabin emerged from the trees the way it always did. Quiet, unremarkable, blending into the gray of the mountainside. Smoke did not rise from the chimney. Ethan rarely used it unless the cold forced him to. He parked beside the porch and cut the engine, sitting for a moment with his hands resting on the steering wheel. The sudden silence pressed in, broken only by the ticking of cooling metal. He glanced sideways. The dog turned her head slightly, enough to meet his gaze. Up close, in the muted light of late afternoon, he could see more detail in her face. The faint silvering around her muzzle that suggested she was no longer young. The scar that pulled one corner of her mouth just enough to make her expression seem perpetually serious. Her eyes were a deep brown, steady and assessing, not pleading. All right, Ethan said quietly. We'll take this slow. He stepped out first, careful not to slam the door. Cold air rushed in when he opened the passenger side. The dog hesitated only a second before climbing down, movements deliberate, weight shifting awkwardly to protect her abdomen. Her paws met the frozen ground, and she paused, nostrils flaring as she took in the unfamiliar scents of pine, wood, and old smoke embedded deep in the cabin's walls. She stayed close to him as they approached the porch, not pressing against his leg, but keeping him in her peripheral vision. When he unlocked the door and pushed it open, she stopped at the threshold. Ethan noticed. He stepped inside first, setting his keys on the small table by the door, then moved aside, giving her a clear path and plenty of space. He waited without urging. The dog leaned forward, one cautious step at a time, as if crossing an invisible line. Her ears flicked at the soft creak of the floorboards. After a long moment, she entered. The cabin seemed smaller with another living being inside. The air felt different, charged, watchful. Ethan shrugged out of his jacket and hung it on the hook by the door, movement slow, predictable. He resisted the urge to fill the silence with reassurance. He knew better than to rush trust. He retrieved an old wool blanket from the hall closet, the one he kept for power outages, and spread it near the far wall of the living room. Not too close to him, not isolated either. A neutral space. The dog watched every movement. When he stepped back, she approached the blanket, sniffed it once, then lowered herself carefully, curling her body in a way that kept her belly shielded. She faced the room, not the wall. Guarding position, Ethan thought, the realization sliding into place without drama. He fetched a bowl from the kitchen, filled it with water, and placed it within her reach. Then he opened a bag of dry dog food he had bought months earlier for a neighbor's stray that never returned. He poured a small amount into another bowl and set it down. She sniffed it, then turned her head away. Ethan didn't comment. Hunger, he knew, was complicated when vigilance outweighed comfort. As evening crept in, the temperature dropped fast. Ethan turned on a lamp instead of overhead lights, preferring the softer glow. He moved through the cabin quietly, heating soup on the stove, wincing slightly at the sound of the burner igniting, but pushing through it. He ate standing at the counter, glancing occasionally toward the living room. The dog remained on the blanket, eyes half-lidded but never fully closing. When night came, it came completely. The mountains swallowed what little light the town produced, and the cabin settled into its familiar stillness. Ethan hesitated at the bedroom door, then left it open. He wasn't sure why he did it. Habit, perhaps, or something else he didn't want to examine too closely. Sleep did not come easily. It never did. When it finally broke through, it was shallow and fractured, the kind that dissolved at the first sign of trouble. Ethan woke with a sharp intake of breath, heart racing, the echo of a memory ringing in his ears. He tasted smoke that wasn't there. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. Then he heard it, a soft, steady sound, nails scraping gently against wood. The dog shifted somewhere in the cabin, moving with controlled purpose. The sound anchored him just enough to breathe again. He lay still, staring at the ceiling, counting until the panic ebbed. When he turned his head toward the doorway, he saw her. She stood just outside the bedroom, framed by shadow, body angled outward toward the rest of the house. She wasn't approaching him. She wasn't retreating. She was simply there, a solid presence dividing him from the darkness beyond. Ethan swallowed hard. "It's okay," he whispered, though his voice trembled. "You can rest." She didn't move. Morning arrived without ceremony. Pale light crept through the windows, illuminating dust motes in the air. Ethan rose slowly, muscles stiff from tension rather than sleep. The dog was already awake, sitting where she had been most of the night, ears alert. He brewed coffee and drank it quietly. She drank water, a few careful laps, but ignored the food again. Ethan noted it without alarm. He knew enough to recognize stress responses when he saw them. A knock at the door startled him. The dog reacted instantly, rising and positioning herself between Ethan and the sound, body squared. Tail low but steady. No bark, no growl, just readiness. Ethan raised a hand slightly, more instinct than instruction. "It's fine," he murmured, unsure if he was speaking to her or himself. He opened the door part way. Standing on the porch was Martha Reed, his nearest neighbor. She was in her early 60s, tall and broad-shouldered, with weathered skin and steel-gray hair pulled into a practical braid. Years of ranch work had given her a posture that spoke of endurance rather than ease. Her eyes were sharp, but not unkind, and they flicked immediately past Ethan to the dog inside. "Well," Martha said, eyebrows lifting, "that's new." "She's staying for now," Ethan replied. Martha nodded once, as if that was explanation enough. "Cold night," she said. "Thought I'd check. Haven't seen smoke from your chimney." "I'm fine." Her gaze lingered on him a moment longer, then returned to the dog. "She looks tired," Martha said simply, "and pregnant." Ethan didn't argue. "I've got extra blankets," Martha continued, "and if you need help, you know where I am." She hesitated, then added, "Good dog." The dog's ears flicked at the sound of Martha's voice, but she did not move. After Martha left, Ethan closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling slowly. The house felt fuller now, heavier with unspoken understanding. That afternoon he tried to fix a loose hinge on the back door. The metallic clatter of the screwdriver hitting the floor sent a jolt through him. His hands shook, breath coming fast. Before the spiral could take hold, the dog moved. She approached to a careful distance, lay down, and matched her breathing to a slow, deliberate rhythm. Ethan found himself following it without thinking, his own breath sinking gradually. When the moment passed, he sank onto the floor, back against the wall. "Thank you," he said quietly. The dog watched him, eyes steady, her silence unchanged. That night, the cabin breathed easier. By the third morning, the cabin had begun to adjust, not in comfort, but in awareness. Ethan noticed it in small, practical ways. How he moved more deliberately through rooms, how he chose quieter motions, how he paused before setting anything metal on wood. The dog noticed everything else. She had taken to a position near the hallway that connected the living room to the back door, lying with her spine aligned to the wall and her head angled toward the open spaces of the house. It wasn't the posture of rest, it was coverage. Her breathing remained steady, controlled, the rise and fall of her ribs shallow but efficient. When Ethan crossed from one room to another, her eyes tracked him, not anxiously, but attentively, as if monitoring a variable she intended to keep within safe limits. Ethan told himself he was imagining meaning where there might be none. He had done that before, clung to patterns because they were easier than silence. Still, the consistency unsettled him. That morning, he decided to open the windows. The air outside was brittle and bright, the cold sharpened by overnight snowfall that lay thin and clean across the ground. Sunlight reflected harshly off the white, throwing light deep into the cabin when Ethan cracked the panes. The smell that followed was pine and frost, clean enough that it didn't trip the alarms in his chest. The dog lifted her head at the sound of the latches but didn't rise. Her ears flicked once, then settled. Ethan took that as permission. He spent the morning cleaning, not because the cabin needed it, but because motion kept his thoughts from circling too tightly. He swept slowly, careful with the broom against the floorboards. When he reached the back door, he noticed the hinge again, the one that had rattled the day before. It hung loose, the screws stripped enough that the metal plate shifted when touched. Ethan hesitated. Avoidance had narrowed his life enough already. He fetched the toolbox from the garage, moving deliberately, grounding himself in the weight of each step. The garage smelled faintly of oil and old smoke, a remnant from years ago when he still believed the scent belonged to work rather than memory. He opened the toolbox and selected a screwdriver with a rubberized grip, less likely to slip. The dog followed him to the threshold but did not cross into the garage. She stopped there, posture upright, body angled toward him, tail low and still. "Stay," Ethan murmured, more to himself than to her. He crouched at the hinge, positioning his body so that if the tool slipped, it would fall away from him. He worked slowly, feeling the vibration of metal through the handle as he tightened each screw. The sound echoed faintly in the enclosed space, sharper than he liked, but manageable. Then the screwdriver slipped anyway. It hit the concrete floor with a sudden, ringing clatter. The sound detonated inside his head. Heat surged up Ethan's spine, breath locking halfway in. The walls of the garage seemed to tilt, the air thickening with the phantom weight of smoke. His hands went numb, fingers curling reflexively as if searching for gloves that weren't there. For a split second, the past overlaid the present so completely that there was no room for anything else. He staggered back, knees hitting the workbench behind him, and slid down to the floor. The dog moved, not fast, not frantic. She crossed the threshold into the garage with careful precision, her steps measured to accommodate her swollen belly. She closed the distance to Ethan and stopped just short of touching him, then lowered herself onto the concrete, her body angled parallel to his. Her breathing shifted, slower, deeper, exaggerated enough to be noticeable. Ethan's vision tunneled, his ears rang, then he felt it, the solid warmth of her flank against his thigh as she leaned in, just enough pressure to anchor him without knocking him over. Her shoulder pressed into his ribs, her breath brushed against his forearm, rhythmic and deliberate. Inhale, exhale, the pattern cut through the chaos like a metronome. Ethan's lungs resisted at first, stubborn and panicked, but his body recognized the cue before his mind caught up. He matched her rhythm without realizing it, breath hitching once, then settling. The garage came back into focus. The concrete was cold beneath him. The workbench was solid at his back. The dog was here, heavy, present, alive. When the shaking subsided, Ethan rested his forearms on his knees and bowed his head. His throat burned. He hadn't realized how close he had come to losing control until it was already over. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay." The dog eased back half an inch, but stayed close, eyes on his face. She didn't pant. She didn't seek praise. She simply remained available. Ethan wiped his face with the heel of his hand and sat there longer than necessary, letting the moment settle. Something about what had just happened felt different from the other episodes he had survived. This wasn't coincidence. It wasn't luck. This was response. Later that afternoon, Ethan made the decision he had been circling since the first night. He needed a veterinarian. The nearest clinic was in town, attached to a converted farmhouse on the outskirts of Hallow Creek. It was run by Dr. Evelyn Porter, a woman in her early 50s with a reputation for competence and blunt honesty. Ethan had met her once years ago during a livestock evacuation after a brush fire. She had been calm in a way that didn't ask permission. He loaded the dog into the truck with care. She hesitated less this time, climbing in with practiced caution. During the drive, she shifted once, then settled, gaze forward. Dr. Porter met them at the door. She was average height, sturdy, with cropped dark hair streaked with silver, and eyes the color of wet stone. Years of outdoor work had left her skin weathered, her hands strong and steady. She knelt briefly to assess the dog's posture before speaking. "She's late term," Dr. Porter said, standing, "and tired." Inside, the examination room smelled of disinfectant and hay. The dog stepped onto the mat without prompting, positioning herself where Dr. Porter indicated. Ethan noticed the efficiency of her movements, the way she adjusted to instructions that hadn't been spoken aloud. Dr. Porter worked quietly, fingers gentle but thorough as she examined the dog's joints, abdomen, and shoulders. She paused at the scars, tracing them lightly. "She's been through something," the vet said. "More than one thing." Ethan nodded. "She's not eating much." "That's stress," Dr. Porter replied, "and pain." She checked the dog's gums, her heartbeat. "She's strong, though, stronger than she should be, given the circumstances." The dog endured the exam without resistance, eyes never leaving Ethan. "She respond like this often?" Dr. Porter asked, glancing between them. Ethan hesitated. "She helps when things get bad." Dr. Porter studied him for a moment, then nodded once. "Doesn't surprise me." She prescribed supplements, pain management safe for pregnancy, and rest. As Ethan paid, Dr. Porter added quietly, "Whatever she was before, she hasn't forgotten it." The drive home was silent. That night, Ethan sat on the living room floor, back against the couch, the dog lying nearby. The house was quiet, not empty, but contained. He watched her breathe, steady and unbroken, and felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Not relief. Recognition. The weight she carried wasn't just physical, it was purpose. And somehow, impossibly, it was holding him upright. The snow began again just after dusk, not heavy, but persistent, the kind that softened edges and made the world quieter than it already was. Ethan noticed it when the light outside the living room window dimmed faster than expected, the glass clouding with frost. Inside, the cabin held its breath. The dog lay on her side near the couch now, one hind leg stretched out, the rise of her belly unmistakable with each slow inhale. Ethan sat at the small kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug he had already finished. He wasn't drinking for warmth. He was grounding himself in the weight of it, the ceramic solid against his palms. Across the room, the dog's ears shifted occasionally, tracking sounds he couldn't hear, snow sliding from branches, the distant growl of a truck somewhere down the road, the house settling as temperatures dropped. What unsettled him wasn't her alertness, it was her restraint. She didn't react the way frightened animals did. There was no restless pacing, no nervous panting. Her awareness was contained, disciplined, as if shaped by rules that no longer existed but still governed her body. Ethan stood and crossed the room slowly, lowering himself onto the floor a few feet away from her. He didn't reach out. He simply sat, observing, letting the silence stretch. The dog turned her head slightly, acknowledging his presence, then returned her gaze to the room. "I keep thinking this is coincidence," he said quietly, "that I'm just seeing what I want to see." She blinked once. Ethan exhaled, a small, humorless sound escaping him. Figures. Later that evening, the power went out. It wasn't dramatic, no flash, no bang, just the sudden absence of the low hum he hadn't realized he depended on. The lamp flickered once and died. The refrigerator fell silent. The cabin plunged into a deeper quiet, thick and unfamiliar. Ethan froze. Darkness had never bothered him. Sudden change had. He stood there, heart rate climbing, the old tension coiling in his shoulders. Somewhere in the house, the dog rose to her feet. He heard her nails on the floor, measured and unhurried. She moved to position herself between Ethan and the windows, her silhouette barely visible in the faint light bleeding in from outside. "Okay," Ethan muttered. "Okay, it's just power." He forced himself to move, retrieving a flashlight from the drawer. When he clicked it on, the beam cut a clean line through the room. The dog's ears flicked at the sound, but she didn't flinch. He noticed something then, how her body adjusted to the light, how she angled herself slightly to keep the darkest corners covered. It was subtle, too subtle to be chance. Ethan tested it. He set the flashlight on the counter and let it roll just enough to clatter softly against the sink. The dog shifted instantly, stepping forward half a pace, shoulders squared, head low, not aggressive, assessing. When nothing followed the sound, she relaxed back into place, eyes never leaving the source. Ethan swallowed. "That's not normal," he whispered. He remembered drills, late nights in smoke-filled rooms where visibility dropped to nothing, and every sound mattered. He remembered dogs trained to read environments faster than humans, to respond without panic, to protect without being told. The realization settled in his chest, heavy and undeniable. She had been trained, not obedient school-trained, not backyard-trained, professional. The next morning, Ethan drove into town early, the snow crunching under his tires. The dog rode with him again, posture steady despite the road's unevenness. He parked near the hardware store, a squat building with peeling paint and a bell that rang sharply when the door opened. The clerk looked up from behind the counter. His name tag read Cal Turner. He was in his late 40s, tall but stooped slightly, with a thick brown beard shot through with gray and deep-set eyes that had learned to watch rather than engage. Years earlier, a logging accident had taken 2 fingers from his left hand, an injury that had quieted him in ways Ethan recognized. "Mornin'," Cal said, nodding toward the dog. "She yours?" "For now," Ethan replied. Cal's gaze lingered on the dog's belly, then on the way she sat beside Ethan, close but not crowding. "She's a worker," he said, not a question. Ethan hesitated. "What makes you say that?" Cal shrugged. "Used to help with search dogs up north. They carry themselves different." He rang up Ethan's purchase, a lantern, extra batteries, duct tape. Whatever she was trained for, it sticks. Outside, Ethan paused before opening the truck door. Snow fell steadily now, quieting the town. The dog looked up at him, eyes clear. "What were you?" he asked softly. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. That afternoon, Martha Reed stopped by again, this time with a box tucked under her arm. She wore the same heavy coat, her braid dusted with snow. "Blankets," she said simply, "and towels, in case." Ethan nodded, accepting the box. "Thank you." Martha's eyes drifted to the dog, who lay watching from the corner of the room. "She's holding," Martha said. "Strong ones do." They didn't say anything else about it. As evening approached, the dog's behavior changed in small but unmistakable ways. She shifted positions more frequently, stood and lay down with visible effort. Her breathing deepened, no longer purely controlled, now threaded with discomfort. Ethan felt a familiar helplessness rise in him, sharp and unwelcome. He paced once, then stopped, forcing himself to stay present. He remembered Dr. Porter's instructions, the signs she'd described. "You're not alone," he said, more firmly now. "We'll get through this." The dog turned her head toward him. For the first time since he'd brought her home, her gaze softened. Not weak, not pleading. Trusting. The power came back just before nightfall, lights flickering on as if nothing had happened. Ethan barely noticed. He was too focused on the living, breathing weight of responsibility settling over him. He laid out the towels, set water within reach, kept his movements slow and predictable. The dog watched him closely, then lowered herself onto the blanket with a careful grunt, sides trembling slightly. Ethan knelt beside her, not touching, giving space but staying close. The snow outside thickened, muffling the world. The cabin felt sealed off, a small pocket of warmth and waiting. Whatever she had been before, whatever work she had done, whatever she had lost, it didn't matter in this moment. What mattered was that something new was coming, and Ethan, for the first time in years, wasn't running from it. The storm settled fully after midnight. Snow pressed against the windows in thick, patient sheets, muting the world beyond the cabin until even the mountains seemed to disappear. The wind threaded through the trees with a low, steady moan, not violent, but relentless, an endurance sound rather than a warning. Inside, the lights were dimmed to a single lamp in the living room, its glow warm but restrained, as if the house itself understood the need for quiet. The dog lay on her side atop the layered blankets Ethan had prepared, her body tense now, in a way that had nothing to do with vigilance. Each breath came deeper, slower, her ribs expanding with effort. Her bout, dulled by neglect when Ethan first saw her, caught the lamplight now, revealing the strength still held beneath it. Thick shoulders, powerful hips, the unmistakable build of a working German shepherd, despite the weight of pregnancy. Ethan knelt several feet away, balanced on the balls of his feet, hands resting uselessly, on his thighs. He had responded to emergencies before, wildfire fronts shifting without warning, trapped livestock, injured crew members, but this felt different. There was no protocol he trusted here, no checklist he could run through to keep fear at bay. The dog shifted suddenly, a low sound escaping her throat. Not a cry, but a strained exhale that pulled Ethan fully into the moment. "All right," he said quietly. "I'm here." Her ears flicked once at the sound of his voice. She didn't look at him, not yet, but her breathing steadied slightly. Ethan took that as encouragement. He stayed where he was, resisting the urge to hover. He remembered Dr. Porter's words. Calm matters more than confidence. Minutes stretched, then contracted again. Time behaved strangely, folding in on itself the way it did during long nights on the fire line. Ethan found himself marking progress not by the clock, but by small changes. The tightening of her abdomen, the way her paws flexed. Against the blankets, the brief pauses between breaths that ended in effort rather than relief. At some point, she lifted her head and met his eyes. The look was unmistakable now. This was not the alert watchfulness he had seen since the flea market. This was something raw, a request without sound, an assessment of whether the space she had chosen was safe enough to finish what her body had begun. Ethan shifted closer, slow enough that she could track every movement. He stopped when he was within arm's reach and held there, letting her decide the rest. After a long moment, she lowered her head again, allowing his presence without retreat. The first puppy arrived just before 2 in the morning. Ethan didn't realize what was happening until it already was. One moment the dog was braced, body rigid. The next there was a sudden release, a wet, fragile sound that cut through the quiet, like a held breath finally let go. A small, dark shape lay between her hind legs, barely moving. Ethan's chest tightened. "It's okay," he murmured, though his voice shook. "You did it. You're doing it." The dog turned awkwardly, pain and urgency warring in her movements, and went to work with practiced instinct. She cleaned the puppy carefully, nudging it closer to her belly. A thin, reedy sound emerged. A cry, weak but unmistakably alive. Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The puppy was small, black, with faint tan markings already visible on its paws. Its fur was slick, its body trembling as it rooted blindly, searching. Within seconds, it found purchase and stilled, the frantic energy replaced by the single-minded focus of survival. One down, Ethan thought, then immediately corrected himself. Not down. Here. The dog settled only briefly before another contraction rippled through her frame. She whined softly this time, a sound that scraped at something deep in Ethan's chest. He leaned forward without thinking, then stopped himself, grounding his hands against the floor instead. "You're not alone," he said again more firmly. "I'm right here." The second puppy took longer. Snow hammered harder against the windows now, the storm intensifying, as if in answer to the struggle unfolding inside. The dog's breathing grew labored, her muscles trembling with effort. Ethan reached for a towel, ready but uncertain, his mind racing with what-ifs he refused to voice. When the puppy finally emerged, it did so in silence. Ethan felt panic surge before he could stop it. He moved closer, heart pounding, watching as the dog immediately turned, licking vigorously, nudging with insistence that bordered on desperation. Seconds passed. Too many seconds. Then the puppy gasped, a thin, rasping inhale, followed by another. Ethan's knees went weak. He sank back onto his heels, overwhelmed by a wave of relief so sharp it bordered on pain. This puppy was lighter in color than the first, more tan than black, its movements slower, more tentative, but alive. The dog lingered over it longer, her body curved protectively, as if shielding it from the cold air that had no business reaching them inside the cabin. The third puppy came near dawn. By then, exhaustion had settled over the room like a second blanket. Ethan's limbs ached from holding tension for hours, his eyes burned from not blinking enough. The dog lay stretched on her side, sides heaving, her strength visibly taxed. When the final puppy arrived, it was smaller than the others, its body thin, fragile in a way that made Ethan's throat tighten. The dog cleaned it with the same fierce attention she had given the rest, but this time she did not relax when the puppy began to breathe. She nudged it repeatedly, softly at first, then with increasing urgency. Ethan's instinct screamed at him to intervene. He moved closer, heart in his throat, ready to act. Then the puppy let out a sound, not loud, but determined. The dog froze, ears flicking. Forward, and then slowly, carefully, she lay still, allowing the puppy to press against her. 3. Ethan counted again, just to be sure. 3 small bodies, pressed close, breathing uneven but steady enough to hope. The dog finally lowered her head to the blankets. exhaustion overtaking vigilance at last. Her eyes closed for only a moment before opening again, scanning the room, finding Ethan where he knelt, their gazes held. Something passed between them then, not gratitude, not ownership, recognition. Ethan swallowed hard. "You did good," he said softly. "You all did." Outside, the storm began to ease. Snow still fell, but the wind softened, its edge dulled. Dawn crept in slowly, pale and tentative, the sky lightening just enough to outline the trees beyond the window. Ethan adjusted the blankets, careful not to disturb the fragile pile of new life. He set fresh water nearby, moved quietly, deliberately, mindful of every sound. The dog watched him with heavy-lidded eyes, her breathing finally slowing into a rhythm that spoke of relief rather than vigilance. When Ethan finally sat back against the couch, fatigue washing over him in a wave, he didn't fight it. He closed his eyes for just a moment, grounding himself in the quiet, in the warmth of the room, in the simple fact that nothing was on fire. For the first time in years, the night ended without loss. Morning did not arrive all at once. It seeped into the cabin slowly, pale and cautious, as if unsure whether it was welcome. Snow still clung to the window frames, but the storm had loosened its grip, leaving behind a quiet that felt earned rather than imposed. The living room smelled faintly of clean towels and warm fur, an ordinary scent made extraordinary by what it contained. Ethan woke on the floor where he had finally drifted off, his back against the couch, neck stiff, limbs heavy with the kind of exhaustion that came from staying present instead of shutting down. For a moment, he didn't move. He listened. There it was, soft, uneven breathing. 3 distinct rhythms layered beneath a fourth, deeper one. He opened his eyes. The German shepherd lay curled on the blankets, her body forming a protective arc around the puppies. Her coat looked darker in the morning light, the lines of her muscles softened by fatigue rather than tension. One ear lay flattened, the other half raised, still alert even in rest. When Ethan shifted, her eyes opened immediately, tracking him, then drifting back to the small cluster at her belly. She had not slept deeply. He doubted she would for a while. "You made it," Ethan said quietly, more statement than praise. The puppies were pressed close, tiny bodies fitted together like pieces that had always belonged. The black one lay sprawled across the others, already claiming more space than its size justified. The tan one tucked its head beneath its sibling's neck, breathing fast but steady. The smallest, dark with faint brindling along its spine, shifted weakly, then stilled again, its chest fluttering like a trapped bird. Ethan rose carefully and moved to the kitchen. He filled a bowl with water and another with softened food, prepared the way Dr. Porter had instructed, placing them within easy reach. The mother dog watched him the entire time, not suspicious, but attentive, her gaze following his hands as if cataloging his intentions. She ate slowly, deliberately, pausing between mouthfuls to glance back at the puppies. When she finished, she drank deeply, then returned to her position without prompting. Ethan sat back on the floor, close enough now that she allowed it, though she still angled her body slightly, instinct refusing to loosen all at once. "I'm thinking names," he said after a while. Her ears flicked. "For them," he clarified. "Not today, just thinking." The thought surprised him with its weight. Names were promises. He had learned that the hard way. A knock came at the door mid-morning. The dog stiffened instantly, lifting her head, body tightening around the puppies. Ethan raised a hand again, palm open, grounding himself before speaking. "It's okay," he murmured. "I've got it." He opened the door to find Dr. Evelyn Porter standing on the porch, bundled against the cold in a thick canvas coat. Her dark hair was tucked beneath a knit cap, her face, more lined in daylight than he remembered, but her eyes were sharp as ever. She carried a medical bag in one hand, a cardboard box in the other. "Thought I'd check in," she said. "Storm nights tend to keep people honest." Ethan stepped aside to let her in. The dog watched closely as Dr. Porter crossed the room, her posture calm, movements unhurried. She knelt a respectful distance away and waited. "Well," Dr. Porter said softly, her voice carrying a note of something like relief. "You did good." The examination was brief and gentle. Dr. Porter checked the mother's gums, listened to the puppy's breathing, weighed them quickly with practiced efficiency. She murmured observations under her breath, more to herself than to Ethan. "They're small, but that's not uncommon given what she's been through," she said finally. "The smallest will need watching, Warmth, frequent nursing. She glanced at Ethan. You up for that? Ethan didn't hesitate. Yes. Dr. Porter nodded once. Good. Before leaving, she paused, studying the dog more closely. She's holding herself differently now, she said, less guarded. That tells me she trusts the environment. Her gaze shifted to Ethan. That doesn't happen by accident. After she left, the cabin settled again. The day unfolded quietly, marked by small rituals, refreshing water, adjusting blankets, counting breaths. Ethan moved through it all with a careful steadiness, the same focus he used to bring to active fire lines. Except now, the stakes felt different, personal. In the afternoon, Martha Reed appeared at the door again, this time with a cautious smile tugging at one corner of her mouth. She peered inside, eyes softening at the sight of the puppies. Well, she said, looks like the storm brought more than snow. She did most of the work, Ethan replied. Martha chuckled softly. They always do. She set a basket down by the door, clean, cloths, canned food, a small space heater. Just in case. As Martha turned to leave, she paused, glancing back. You know, she said, I've seen a lot of animals come through this valley. Some stay, some don't, but the ones that survive, they tend to change the places they land. Ethan watched the door close behind her. That evening, as the light faded again, Ethan found himself sitting beside the dog, closer than before. He didn't touch her. He didn't need to. The proximity was enough. You don't have a name, he said quietly. The dog looked at him, really looked at him this time, her gaze steady but no longer guarded. I don't think you need one yet, he continued, but I do. The words felt right as soon as he said them. Mercy, he whispered. The dog didn't react outwardly, no wagging tail, no lifted ears. But something in her posture eased, just slightly, as if a weight had shifted. Ethan exhaled. The puppies stirred as the room darkened, their small sounds filling the spaces silence once claimed. Ethan watched them, marveling at the fragile insistence of life, at how something so small could demand such presence. Later, after ensuring everything was settled, he pulled out his phone. He stared at the screen for a long moment before opening the voice recorder. It's evening, he said softly. They're here. All of them. He paused, choosing his words with care. I stayed. He stopped the recording and set the phone aside. When night came again, it didn't feel like an enemy. The cabin held warmth now, not just physical, but earned. Mercy lay resting, eyes half closed, her breathing deep and steady. The puppies nursed, then slept, then stirred again, repeating the cycle with quiet determination. Ethan lay back against the couch, watching it all, his thoughts uncharacteristically still. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel like something he had to outrun. It felt like something he could sit with. Spring did not arrive in Hollow Creek with celebration. It came the way it always did, quietly, almost apologetically. Snow retreating in thin, uneven patches, mud replacing ice, the air softening just enough to suggest that endurance had paid off. The mountains remained watchful, but the sharp edge in the wind dulled, and with it, something in Ethan loosened. The puppies grew quickly. Within weeks, their movements shifted from tentative to clumsy confidence. The black one, broad-chested even as a pup, claimed space with the certainty of something that expected the world to make room. The tan one followed more than led, observant, careful, always watching before acting. The smallest, once so fragile Ethan had counted its breaths, surprised him most. It lingered at the edges, alert and intent, responding to sound before motion, eyes tracking details others missed. Mercy watched them all with a patience that bordered on reverence. Her body healed steadily. The hollowed look she had, carried into the cabin, softened as weight returned to her frame. Her coat regained its sheen, the dull ash replaced by deep black and rich tan. The scars remained, thin, pale lines etched into her shoulders and ribs, but they no longer defined her posture. She moved with quiet authority now, rising smoothly, settling deliberately, eyes calm rather than searching. Ethan adjusted his days around them without thinking. Morning meant warm water refreshed, food prepared carefully, towels changed. Midday brought short walks along the tree line, Mercy moving ahead but never out of sight, the puppies wobbling behind like mismatched shadows. Evenings settled into routines of quiet observation, the cabin filled with soft sounds, paws on wood, small breaths, the low hum of the heater cycling on and off. The nightmares did not vanish. They never did. But when they came differently. Ethan woke less often in a panic, his body finding its way back to the present faster. Sometimes Mercy rose and stood near the bed, not touching, just close enough to be felt. Other times she stayed where she was, trusting that he could steady himself without her moving. That trust mattered more than the help itself. One afternoon, as the ground finally dried enough to support vehicles without complaint, Ethan drove into town for supplies. Mercy rode beside him as she always did now, posture relaxed but alert. He parked near the old warehouse again. Not the market this time, but the office attached to it. A sign taped to the door read, "Animal Services, hours posted inside." Ethan hesitated before going in. Inside, the office smelled faintly of disinfectant and old paper. A woman sat behind the counter, sorting files with efficient, practiced motions. She looked up as the door opened. Her name tag read Lena Morales. She was in her mid-30s, compact and sharp-featured, with dark hair pulled into a tight ponytail. There was a scar along her jawline, faint but noticeable, the kind that suggested an accident she didn't feel the need to explain. Her eyes were direct, assessing without being unkind. "Can I help you?" she asked. Ethan nodded toward Mercy, who waited calmly at his side. "I'm looking to make things official," he said, "for her and the pups." Lena's gaze shifted to Mercy, then back to Ethan. "She's not fixed," she said, stating the obvious. "She just gave birth," Ethan replied evenly. Lena's expression softened a fraction. "Right." She glanced down at her clipboard. "We'll need records, vet confirmation, temporary foster status for the puppies until they're ready." "I'm not looking to surrender them," Ethan said. "I want to keep her." Lena studied him more closely now, her eyes moving over the careful way he stood, the distance he kept, the steadiness in his voice that felt practiced rather than casual. "And the puppies?" Ethan paused. "They'll need homes," he said. "Good ones," Lena Yee nodded once. "That can be arranged." She hesitated, then added, "You'd be surprised how many people are willing if you give them the chance." The paperwork took longer than Ethan expected, but it didn't feel like an obstacle. It felt like a marker, something tangible anchoring what had already become real. Word traveled faster than he would have liked. By the following week, people began stopping by the cabin. Not crowds, just individuals. A retired couple looking for a companion dog. A young woman who volunteered at the library and wanted a hiking partner. Each visit was brief, careful, Mercy always present, assessing with a seriousness that made Ethan trust her judgment more than his own. She rejected two without drama, placing herself between the puppies and the visitors, posture firm but calm. Ethan didn't question it. The third visit was different. Tom Gallagher arrived alone, driving an old pickup with a cracked windshield and a dented tailgate. He was in his early 50s, lean, with sun-weathered skin and a beard-trimmed clothes out of necessity rather than vanity. His hands bore the marks of someone who worked outdoors, scarred, capable. He moved slowly, deliberately, the way people do after learning that rushing costs more than it saves. Tom crouched when he entered, lowering himself to the puppy's level without reaching. He let them come to him. The smallest pup approached first, sniffed his boots, then sat back on its haunches, head tilted. Tom smiled, just a little. "Hey there," he said softly. His voice was rough, but gentle. Ethan watched Mercy. She stood, alert, then stepped aside. That was enough. The day Tom left with the smallest puppy, Ethan stood on the porch longer than he expected to. The loss stung, sharp and brief, then settled into something quieter. The pup looked back once from the truck window, then disappeared down the road. 2 weeks later, the tan puppy followed, bound for a family with children and a yard, full of noise and laughter. The black one stayed longer, reluctant to leave Mercy's side. When the right person finally came, a forest ranger named Clara Whitfield, tall and steady, with hands that smelled faintly of pine, Mercy allowed it. When the door closed behind them, the cabin felt larger, not emptier, different. That evening, Ethan sat on the floor, Mercy beside him, the space between them comfortable now. He rested a hand against her shoulder, feeling solid muscle beneath warm fur. "You did your job," he said quietly. "All of it." Mercy leaned into the contact, just slightly. Weeks passed, then months. Ethan found himself talking to people again, not many. Enough. He helped Martha mend a fence. He met Cal Turner for coffee at the diner. He volunteered once a week at the animal clinic, cleaning kennels, walking dogs that needed steady hands more than enthusiasm. Mercy went with him sometimes. She became a familiar sight around town, quiet, composed, never pulling on the leash. Children learned quickly that she did not tolerate chaos, but she accepted careful hands and soft voices. Adults lowered their tones around her without realizing why. One afternoon, as Ethan locked up the clinic, Dr. Porter watched Mercy watching him. "She found her place," the vet said. Ethan nodded. "So did I." On the first truly warm evening of the year, Ethan sat on the porch, Mercy lying at his feet. The sun dipped low, painting the mountains in gold and shadow. The past did not vanish. It never would. But it no longer defined the horizon. Ethan breathed in the cool air and let it go. For the first time since the fire, he wasn't waiting for the next alarm. He was home. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive with thunder or fire. They arrive quietly, through a broken man who chose to stay, through a wounded animal who refused to give up, through lives the world had already written off. The Bible tells us that God is close to the brokenhearted, and sometimes He sends healing not in the way we expect, but in the form of responsibility, compassion, and a second chance we didn't believe we deserved. This story is not just about a man and a dog. It's about all the forgotten souls we pass by every day, the ones who carry pain in silence, the ones who are priced cheaply by a careless world, the ones still protecting life, even while hurting. If you are watching this today and feel unseen, remember this: God does not waste pain. What looks like an ending may be the beginning of a calling. What feels like survival may be preparation. And if you see someone, a child, an animal, a neighbor, standing alone in fear, do not turn away. That moment may be the miracle God placed directly in your path. If this story touched your heart, please share it so hope can reach someone who needs it today. Leave a comment below and tell us where you are watching from. We would love to pray with you. And if you believe in second chances, quiet miracles, and a God who restores what the world abandons, please subscribe to the channel so more stories like this can be told. May God bless you, may He protect your heart, and may He walk beside you through every fire and every winter. You are not alone. Amen.